Welcome back to the Exodus Collective with me, Zoe Smith. It's mango season, so I'm back under the mango tree. If only you could smell the aroma of where I am now. In this week's episode, I'm talking to Steve Lewis. He is one of the admins of an awesome Facebook group called the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society. They do amazing work helping folks to connect to their ancestral roots, to do research, understanding which documents you need to work for. And for those of us in the diaspora who are thinking about making moves back to the region, for many of us, finding our roots, connecting with our ancestors, understanding the places, the experiences that they've shared really is a large part of the journey. I know for me, in the few months that I've been back, it's been amazing to walk the land that my great-great-grandfather purchased, that his forebears worked on as slaves, to understand how a great-great-grandmother came over from Carriacou and purchased tracts of land. You know, all that brilliance and power and resilience that is never shared with you in the UK or the US or Canada, where our history is packed into Black History Month. In the Caribbean, you just realize that it's so much more than that, so much more complex, so much more vast. So yeah, it was a real pleasure to chat with Steve. He's an awesome guy. The group is really amazing, and I think everyone in Grenada, whether you're in the diaspora or born and bred on the island, should really join this group because it's just brilliant in terms of making connections. I've already connected with like distant cousins that I didn't even know I had there. So yeah, I'd highly recommend it. Anyway, that's enough from me. Check out the interview with Steve, join the Facebook group, and if you're not from Grenada, like, still do your research. I think understanding the destinations that we came from really is important, and there's so many amazing resources out there. Paul Crooks does amazing stuff in Jamaica. I'm sure there are groups in Barbados as well. So yeah, get digging. Even if you're not about making a permanent move back to the West Indies, understanding your links it's amazing. It's really amazing. But yeah, check out the interview, and that is enough from me. If you are interested in maybe some sessions with Steve, we were even talking about having an in-person event, let me know in the comments. But yeah, enough rambling. Go check out the interview. See you soon. But tell me more about you. What is it that led you on this journey to be as passionate and invested as you are in tracking roots?
Thank you. I'm really very passionate about it. My journey started with the sad passing of my dad. So he died about 14 years ago. And he was quite a private man. And he'd left behind a set of papers that I'd never seen before. He never discussed with me. And when I looked into it, there were a set of papers, wills, land transactions, inventages, from people that I'd never ever heard of before in my life. And it dated right back to 1838. Which of course is a key date because it's the emancipation of slavery. So I thought, well, here's a chronicle of the journey of my family, literally that. And so I got very interested to find out, well, who is this person, and why has my dad got this information, and why is he keeping this? And one thing I quickly found was that it's very, very hard to get information on Grenada's history. A lot of it is not recorded. A lot of the records have been lost. A lot of the records are not online, so you have to go into archives. There are some archives in London, but a lot of information that you would want just is not available. So that was really very, very tricky. So I started to write my family tree on Ancestry. And one thing I found, with my dad being one of 8, my mum being one of 11, giving me 58 first cousins. Wow. Both parents were from St. John. So one from Gwarth, the other from Concord. They're not a million miles away. And I found, with the family being so big on both sides, really, I found that there were cousins on one side that ended up being distant related to a cousin on that side. And even within each family, because families were very big in those days and people didn't travel very far, you quite often found relationships between distant cousins as well. So I started, I'm still on a quest to find out my own back history, but a large part of that I'm learning through looking at the back history of my cousins. So this family tree that I intended to be so deep and go back into the centuries, I haven't actually got that far deep. I'll tell you how far I've got, but it's very wide. And I've got a lot of information on a lot of my extended family. I can tell you I've actually got now almost 15,000 names
Wow.
in my family tree. That's how busy I've been. It's a works, it's a life's work. So I've gone to plotting this enormous tree and saving on Ancestry. And I thought to myself, because I'm helping a lot of other people who are related to me or end up in my family tree somehow. I thought about just making a little bit more sense out of this by writing my own kind of history. So rather than saying my grandfather was born, as he was born in 1881, my grandfather, my dad's father, what do I know about the life and times of Grenadians in 1881? So I thought, well, that'll be interesting to me, because then I could find out just what sort of life he may have led. I knew he was a tailor, but what does this mean exactly in 1881? And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I'll keep on going farther back and just trying to find out the life and times of my forefathers. And as I was doing that, I got more and more interested in Grenada's history. So then where do you start? And I thought, do you know something? I don't know anything about Grenada's history. I'm going to go back as far as I can. So I went as far back as the Amerindians. So I started reading a lot about them, writing a bit of a summary for my own purposes, really, and then building on from that. So I'll go into the French occupation, I'll go into slavery, I'll go into the British occupation, I'll go into Fedon's rebellion, all the key and major events that have happened during Grenada's history. And I'm writing all this down. And then before I know it, I've got 200 pages. Wow. And I'm thinking, well, this is actually quite something. I don't think this is going to be a book I'm going to sell, but it's definitely going to be a manuscript I want to preserve. I might even publish it, but just a limited number of copies just to give to my family members. So it got me really generally very, very interested. I chanced across, because I talked to so many people online, because I've got this massive tree and people contact me and I'm helping other people. I got chatting to a fellow who has Grenadian heritage, and he's based in the States. And the two of us got talking, and he set up the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society online. I joined within days as being one of the administrators, and we now have a team of 4 of us who are running that site. And we started with a number of interests that culminate in us just getting a better knowledge of our history. I say a number of interests. The main interests there are the history of Grenada, and then also family history. And so between the 4 of us, we kind of have our own kind of interests in one or other of those 2 areas. And to a greater or lesser extent, we can help each other and our members to help to understand their own journeys. And we started small. We're just on Facebook. We're financing the whole thing ourselves. It's not much money, but it's a lot of our own time that we are resourcing. And we've been going for it's almost 2 years now, and we have, I think it's about 2,000, just over 2,100 members, which we're thrilled about, because even to this day, from we started 2 years ago, it's a very, very busy site. Lots of people posting lots of information and getting lots of support for that. And I've belonged to other groups in the past, and it's just, you put a question out there and you're lucky to get an answer 6 months later. Wow. And people just don't respond. But somehow we've just captured, I think, the momentum here by being a very active group, by being very sharing within our group. We do an awful lot as the 4 admin people, but we have some very, very active members as well. We have historians amongst our midst. We have other authors. We have teachers. We have people from all walks of life who are contributing to this site. It's a great resource to have. Yeah. So I've rambled on a little bit there. So.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. And the more you talk, the more questions I have as well. So I'm wondering how I'm going to go through this.
Good.
One of the things I find really interesting is that you have this wealth of information that someone must have passed that on to your father, so he knew that it was significant enough to keep, yet he never mentioned it to you.
No.
Why do you think that was, and why do you think that seems to happen so often within our families, that sort of storytelling, the history? I mean, maybe my family is unique and your family is unique, but it doesn't feel uncommon for the lack of interest for the older generation to understand the value of sharing this information, passing it on, telling those stories.
It's a mystery to me, really, because my mother, on the other hand, she's 86 years old, and she loves to talk about the family, and she has loads of stories, and she talks about it all the time. And as a child, it used to go like that. You know, it's kind of like background noise, and I generally was not interested at all. But now I'm older and I do have an interest. I find myself recording what she says, just so I can remember and capture everything, and then kind of make sense of it. And if I can, put it in my manuscript or put it in the family tree. I find that very, very, very important. My dad, on the other hand, he amassed a bit of information. He had diaries. He had dates. He'd written in these diaries of key dates of family members, whether it's birthdays, marriages, funerals, just key information. But he never spoke about it, and he clearly was interested. And I, you know, it's one of those things I would love to now sit down with him and really go through everything, but I don't have that. But I think he's given me a bit of a gift, a bit of a head start to the journey that I'm now taking for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the lesson, the message from that is for those of us who do still have elders alive who can document those stories. Like, let's start that conversation now. My gran as well. I would love to sit down and interview her. And she's one of the ones who's like, oh, but why are you interested in that? This is old stuff. But once she goes, like, that information is lost. And who knows how valuable that will be to her great-great-grandchild who's trying to understand the concepts which they came from. So I think preserving that is so, so important. Yeah. So let's go back to some of the practical logistical stuff. You mentioned that some sort of documentation can be hard to find for Grenada. And that echoes my experience. Before we started, I was telling you about reading the book by Paul Crooks and attending his webinar that was all about how to research Caribbean ancestry. And I definitely found, one, I mean, I'm not a great researcher, but two, some of the stuff that it was assumed one would be able to find for Jamaica, you couldn't necessarily find in the Grenadian context. So can you explain a little bit about why it's hard to find, or what in particular is hard to find, and perhaps how that differs to other Caribbean islands, if you can?
I can. The records that we have in Grenada just haven't been stored very well. And they've been lost through a fire. They've been lost through floods. They've not been maintained, so they deteriorate. I think the churches now are getting more and more of their own records online, which is useful. I've been to Grenada to try and find just some general records about the family, but to get the help from the church, they kind of need for you to ask for a specific name, and if you don't know what you're looking for, it's hard. You can't do that, but they have to sort of balance that with data privacy and that sort of stuff. So I think the records have been destroyed. So which is why we come to a bit of a halt. The other thing which I found of more recent times was a manuscript that was written by one of our administrators, Angus Martin. You'll know him as he's a prolific historian on all matters Grenadian. He wrote a manuscript that really changed my research, because I was of the assumption, my name is Lewis, I was of the assumption that all of our family names, because of our history with slavery, were given to us because we lived on a certain plantation. So we took the master's name or the plantation's name, because why else would an African be carrying a name Lewis? Why would that happen? And so I was kind of thinking, okay, and I know in my family, as with I think a lot of Caribbean families, if you go back far enough, you're going to find there's we have a European ancestry as well as an African ancestry. so I kind of thought, okay, so who is this Lewis chap that, you know, came to Grenada and, you know, trying to find out a plantation that maybe he owned or he was an overseer at, and I can't find anything. And Lewis as well is a very popular name in Grenada, popular name worldwide. So it's not to assume that all Lewises are related, because it clearly aren't. So it is very, very hard. So this manuscript that Angus wrote was very informative, because he said, well, look, if you take the 20 most common family names in Grenada, you'll notice that they have one thing in common. They are the first names of male people. So I think the most common name in Grenada is Thomas. And, you know, you can think of Williams, you can think of David, you can think of, you know, there's a whole host, Noel, you can think of a whole host of family names that we all know in Grenada. And if you think about it, that is true. They are male first names. So in his research, what he concluded was that after emancipation, you're on a plantation, you're freed, you have the one name, and that name is Lewis. So then when you're out and you're free, then you're going to have your own family. You then keep that name Lewis, but your child becomes, I don't know, John Lewis, Stephen Lewis, Paul Lewis. And so how that redirected my own research was, if I could look at all of the male enslaved people who were freed at that time and carried the name Lewis, that's probably a better way of finding out where my family were from. And in the case of Lewis, it was unusual, because even though to this date is one of the most popular names in Grenada, at the time of slavery, there are only 5 Lewises who were around. Wow. According to those records. And because my family was from St. John, I beg your pardon, I think there's 5 from St. John, which then limits that research quite dramatically if I follow the line of this research. So I was able then to look at the slave registers and find out the age groups of these 5 Lewises who were in St. John. And I think, I forget the detail off the top of my head, I have it all written down, but one was like, you know, a really old person, so not likely then to have had children, so maybe discount him as being a possible. So I think I came with 2 or 3 that were you know, the right sort of age, who would have had children, and quite possibly could be my ancestors who lived on the plantation. So that was of interest. Certainly, I think if you have one of those names, I'd be very keen to do the same sort of thing. Just look at the parish records, look at the number of people who share your family name as their first name as males, and see where that leads. For me, that was it really, as I say, it really did redirect my own research.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Ooh, there's a bit of an echo, but it's so different, isn't it, from the UK perspective? If you're white and born and bred there, you just go through the records, they're easy to check. You really have to be very motivated and quite creative in understanding how to navigate through that. Certainly
do. I had because I'm the family historian, because I've 15,000 names. So one of my she's actually my cousin's daughter. She's mixed race, so her father is English, and I was sharing with her our Grenadian history, and her mind was just blown away. It was just, couldn't believe it had so much information. And the furthest back I can go back and on her line is to my great grandfather, who was born in 1797, and he was 95 when he died, so he lived a good long old age. And so that for her was, you know, mind-blowing enough. And she said, well, that's wonderful, but, you know, she kind of liked to find out more on her father's side. He's from Essex. So I said, okay, let me have a look. So I went on to Ancestry, and I think it was My Heritage. And I just went back as far as I could. It was literally one night. and I got to like 1435 or something ridiculous, because English history is wonderful. It's so well documented. And so I could go back and back and back and back and back in one night. It's taken me 14 years to get to my great-great-grandfather, and I'm stuck.
Wow.
So it's a challenge, I think, for us. I think for most of us, if we can get as far back to the first person that wasn't enslaved, we do well. If we can find someone who was enslaved, we've done very well. To get beyond that, I think is very, very difficult to achieve unless you've got DNA records, and then can partner with someone in whatever place in Africa, presumably, to get a link. And I managed to do that as well. But it's interesting. It is interesting.
Yeah. What's your African heritage? Have you done the DNA test?
Well, I have, and I think quite typical with a lot of us, it's a smattering of everything along the western coast of Africa. I think predominantly it's Ghana, but it's Nigeria, it's Cameroon, it's Togo, it's a whole host of West African states, and curiously enough, 7% Kenyan over in the east, which was a surprise to me. But I guess people migrate and people move, but 7% is quite significant.
Yeah, mine is remarkably homogenous. I think I'm 60% Nigerian.
Wow.
30% Benin, Togo.
All right,
and, 10% Mali, and the rest European. So I'm like 90% African, and not that diverse at all. So it's really, and it's funny, I was listening to an interview with a cousin of mine who now lives in Trinidad, and he was talking about his grandmother, and she would sing songs in Igbo. And when my grandfather's side would come over, she would say, "What are those Yoruba people doing in my yard?" It's interesting.
Wow, really? That's close then, isn't it?
Yeah, so it kind of makes me wonder, were they indentured, like, to have that much awareness of where people were from, like their ethnic identity. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting. So for someone looking to start, say, you know who your great-grandfather was, you know his name, you know where he was born, maybe you don't even know when he was born. Where do you recommend people to start? And how, simple, let's keep it simple.
I think my starting point would be with Ancestry.
Okay.
It seems to have the biggest record of, just the biggest number of records. That said, it's not necessarily the richest in Caribbean records, but it's still, I think, the go-to place. It's still the go-to place. I would also say I would certainly recommend coming along to our own site, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of experience now in putting trees together. So I would literally put a note out on Facebook and through our site and just say what name you're looking to research, and you'll probably find that someone else is either researching that name or has that information. That aside, in terms of other sources, there are a whole host of websites like Ancestry that carry records. Any number of those can be used. I think I would lead with Ancestry though.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I've been quite surprised at is how easy it is to get copies of birth certificates from the registry office here in Grenada.
Yes.
I've actually got to go and pick one up for my dad, but I'm also wondering, like, my grandmother or great-grandmother, I'm really keen to find out more about her father. But the information on the birth certificate doesn't really give you that much, does it? It will just say the name. It won't say where they were born or when they were born or their profession, which you might find in other countries.
Yeah, so again, some of our own records, even when you get hold of them, can be a little bit limited. But such is the way we have to deal with that.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so tell me more about the slave records and the process of navigating through that. How much have you found is available online? And say if someone is in the US and wants to research their family history, what options are there for them if they don't necessarily want to visit the UK?
Well, I think sites like Ancestry are very good at hosting slave registers. My Heritage is another one. There are a few that will host them, and it's all the same source. It's all the same information. If you're fortunate enough to live near your own sort of national archives, we have one here in London at Kew, they'll have an exhaustive list of those records. Not all of it is digitized right now, so you can't get all of it online, but you can go and look at, or you can get microfilms, in fact, and so you can look at those records. You can spend a bit of time, and also if you can get to the National Archives, you'll find that there are volunteers actually, but researchers who can help you with that search as well. So you can find an awful lot now. The other thing is, I am fortunate enough to live very close to a family centre, one of these Latter-day Saints centres. So it's a church, but they have a number of records on microfilms across centres across the UK, across many countries actually. And I'm fortunate enough to have one literally a 10-minute walk away from where I live. So you can go in there and you can look at microfilms. You don't have to go all the way to London in my case to get the records. I've got something that's around the corner. So for example, I can look at the register and not only look at slave registers, I can look at birth records and deaths, marriages, by parish, by year. And what I've done on occasion when I've gone there is to take copies of the certain years, and I can just share it with our group. Nice. So I'm going there looking at information for my own family, or looking at particular names, but rather than just taking up the one record I'm looking for my family member, it's on a page with maybe 10 others. If I literally take a copy of that, I can share it with other people. And this is what I mean about our group, just having this information, just sharing between us.
Yeah, fantastic. And so we're wrapping up, but I would love to know any interesting or surprising stories that have emerged about your family. I mean, I'm sure there must, you've got 15,000 people, but any stories that stand out, or any interesting observations that you come across in the process of researching?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, there are quite a few stories of people being lost within the family. I've managed to sort of reconnect people who've been lost over generations. I have knowledge of my own father's family, but my grandfather had a brother, for example, who had a very small family in America, and most of that family died young, as it happened. And there are literally two living members in that whole family. So my grandfather's brother had 5 children. So you can imagine just 2 living people out of that. It's quite a surprise. And I was in contact with one of those people, who is my second cousin, so bloodlines, it's quite close, who had no idea they had such a large family with wow. my own family. So we were able to reconnect, and that was wonderful, because again, for him, it's like he couldn't believe, he had no knowledge of his grandfather's siblings or any of that side of the family. So that was pretty wonderful. So yeah, that was a big one for us. I mean, there are many stories. I'm trying to think of others, but there are many stories.
Yeah. And how has the process of researching your ancestry changed your understanding of who you are as a person? Has it changed at all?
Well, I find the research very, very interesting, and it's made me a lot more inquisitive about the place that my parents came from and the choice they made to leave Grenada to come to the UK, and what lives they led and their parents led in Grenada. So I think I have a better appreciation. So on the times when I go to Grenada and I see my family over there, again, I have a better appreciation for the different ways in which we grew up. I consider myself in many ways very fortunate to be growing up in the UK where I grew up, and having some of the opportunities I had, and that maybe some of my other relatives didn't have. So I think it just makes me a lot more appreciative for what I do have, and not wanting to take things for granted. and certainly wanting to pass that on to my children, and to value what they have, and what they can do in life.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fantastic. And I think for me, one of the things that's been interesting just from the limited research that I've done is realizing how very un-Grenadian I actually am. So the links to family in Barbados, St. Vincent, Aruba, it's really interesting for me. Like, I was solidly waving the flag, but actually I'm from all over the Caribbean, and that's before we even get to the African part. So it's definitely a process worth embarking upon, because I think, it just changes your understanding of yourself. For sure.
It certainly does. Yeah, I think it certainly does.
Yeah.
And I recommend it to anybody. It's enlightening, I feel, and I think I think we all benefit from having a better appreciation of where we're from.
For sure, definitely. Well, if people want to find out more, what's the best approach? What would you recommend? Join your group?
Well, I would certainly say that. So the group is the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society online. You find us on Facebook, and look forward to helping you, and looking forward to seeing you all there.
Yeah, fantastic. Steve, it's been amazing talking to you. It's been lovely to spread the word of what you're doing, and just more power to you and the rest of the admins of the group, because it's a really fantastic resource. And maybe one day we can actually do an event in Grenada, sort of get people together, get them working through archives, because I think quite often people feel overwhelmed, but actually, as your example has shown, once you get started, it's kind of like it's a rolling stone that gathers speed as you go along.
It certainly is, and that event in Grenada sounds fantastic. So we should do that, definitely.
Perfect. Let's get planning. And for those of you watching, if you're interested, drop us a note in the comments. But join Steve's group as well. But Steve, thanks so much for taking the time, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks very much, Zoe.